Imagine stepping off the ship at Ellis Island in 1905, the air thick with salt, coal smoke, and hope. You've left everything behind, clutching a suitcase and a few family recipes scribbled in Yiddish. New York isn't welcoming, not yet, but the scent of bread baking on Hester Street feels like a promise. This was the world Jewish immigrants built, one recipe at a time. In cramped tenement kitchens and bustling pushcarts of the Lower East Side, food wasn't just survival. It was identity. Every dish carried whispers from the old world, the butter-stained dough of rujlak, the slow-simmered brisket for Shabbat, the tang of pickles sold from wooden barrels. These recipes were born out of poverty, yet they spoke of abundance. They told stories of mothers stretching a few onions and flour into feasts, of men rising before dawn to knead dough, of children tasting America for the first time through a slice of babka or a bagel with lox. And as decades passed, these foods became the backbone of what we now call New York cuisine. But back then, they were humble acts of remembrance, of faith, of family, of home. Join us as we rediscover 15 forgotten foods that once filled the kitchens of old New York's Jewish immigrants, dishes that carried more than flavor, they carried a people's story. This is America's Lost Recipes, where every bite is a piece of history. They say every immigrant carried a dream, but some carried a recipe. For many Jewish families stepping onto Ellis Island around 1900, that recipe was for a humble pastry called rujlak, a sweet born from scarcity, baked with love, and wrapped in memory. Rujlak wasn't fancy. It was made from what little could be found: flour, butter, maybe a spoon of jam, or a handful of chopped nuts saved for Sabbath. Yet in those tight tenement kitchens of the Lower East Side, it sent filled rooms like a song from home. Mothers rolled the dough thin over chipped tabletops, teaching daughters how to shape each crescent with care. Sugar dusted over the top wasn't just for taste, it was a quiet act of defiance against hunger. Every bite reminded them that sweetness still existed, even in the hardest of times. By the 1920s, pushcarts and bakeries lined Delancey Street, selling rujlak by the dozen. Immigrants bought them not only for flavor but for comfort, a connection to Sabbath evenings back in Warsaw or Odessa. Over time, rujlak became a symbol of endurance, a pastry that traveled oceans and outlasted empires. Its flaky spirals carried the story of survival, of family, and of hope baked golden in an unfamiliar land. So the next time you taste rujlak, remember, it isn't just dessert. It's a sweet that crossed the Atlantic and never forgot where it came from. This is America's Lost Recipes, where every bite tells the story of those who built a nation from crumbs of courage. Imagine the oven door in a cramped tenement on a chilly Friday afternoon around 1910. The flame glows under a heavy black kettle, and you can almost smell the sugar melting into dough. That's where the story of babka really begins. Jewish immigrants stepping into New York often found themselves with nothing but hope and tradition in their suitcases. In places where meat was rare and flour was precious, they turned leftover Sabbath dough into something unexpected, a sweet loaf rolled with jam or cinnamon, baked with patience and pride. In those early Lower East Side kitchens, the braided shape of the babka was more than a design, it was a declaration. But when chocolate became accessible, that humble dough was transformed again. Chocolate ribbons wound through the loaf like a river of possibility. Mothers lifted it from the coal-fired oven with one hand, and with the other held the promise of better days. This was not indulgence. This was survival. Each warm slice whispered, "We made the Atlantic crossing, we claimed this city, and we carried the old world into the new." Bakeries on Orchard and Delancey Street sold these braided wonders by the loaf, and neighborhood kids held their breath at the sight. Today, when you pull apart a slice of babka and see its swirled interior, remember this: you're tasting more than butter and chocolate. You're tasting the story of displaced families, of shared ovens and dinner table laughter, of a community refusing to fade. And that's the legacy. America's Lost Recipes is where we bring these voices back into the kitchen, taste the past, and carry it forward. You walk into a tenement kitchen on the edge of the Lower East Side circa 1910. Coal fire embers glow, the air is thick with the scent of onions and garlic, and a heavy pot sits on the stove. This is where survival takes shape as a meal. For many Jewish immigrant families, the cut of meat known as brisket was the cheapest cut in the butcher's case. Tough, stringy, and affordable. Yet in those crowded kitchens it became something else entirely: hope. Women trimmed the fat, laid the meat with onions, mushrooms, and a handful of broth, then slid the covered casserole into the oven, letting time do the work. This wasn't fast food. It was slow justice. Every hour that passed thickened the gravy, softened the meat, and filled the apartment with the sound of something good finally happening. In a land where so much was uncertain, the arrival of a golden brown brisket at the Friday table said, "We lasted. We rose. We are here." On factory whistle Saturdays, families would gather around that pot, slicing pieces meant for everyone, sharing more than just meat. They shared story, relief, belonging. The brisket didn't just feed bodies, it fed identity. The flavor of patience, the richness of survival, the tenderness earned. And when that same dish later made its way into storefront delis and holiday tables across New York, it carried with it the sweat of tenements, the hush of ovens, and the low thrum of immigrant ambition. So next time you take a fork to that slice of slow-braised brisket, remember, it isn't just comfort food. It's history, served. This is America's Lost Recipes, bringing forgotten flavors and the stories behind them back to the table. Picture this: Hester Street, 1912. Steam curls up from a pushcart, the winter air bites, and a man shouts through the noise of wagons and laughter, "Hot knishes. 2 cents." That sound was New York's heartbeat. The knish began as a modest creation from Eastern Europe, a pocket of dough stuffed with mashed potatoes, onions, maybe cabbage or kasher if you were lucky. When Jewish immigrants arrived on the Lower East Side, the knish became their companion, cheap, filling, and endlessly portable. Women rolled the dough in cramped kitchens, while their children sold them on corners before school. The aroma of baked pastry and butter drifted through tenement windows, mingling with the coal smoke of the city's hunger. Each one was shaped by hand, imperfect, uneven, and beautiful. By the 1920s, knish carts lined Coney Island's boardwalk. New Yorkers of every kind, dock workers, tailors, newsboys, bit into that flaky crust and tasted something rare: equality. The knish belonged to everyone. For immigrant families, it wasn't just food, it was survival wrapped in dough. You could eat one walking home from the factory, standing in the cold, dreaming of better days. It was comfort that fit in a hand. And when the knish finally made its way into diners and delis across the city, it carried with it the stories of mothers who baked through the night, of fathers who sold warmth one pastry at a time. Because in every golden crust, there's proof of what built this city, and not just steel and sweat, but hope, baked fresh each morning. This is America's Lost Recipes, where even the simplest street snack becomes a monument to resilience. The Lower East Side once had a smell all its own: vinegar, garlic, and salt wafting from wooden barrels that lined Orchard Street. To some, it stung the nose. To others, it smelled like home. For Jewish immigrants in the early 1900s, pickles weren't just a snack, they were survival science. In a world before refrigerators, brine was preservation, and cabbage, cucumbers, or beets became treasure that could last through long winters. Every barrel was a small miracle of patience, bubbling quietly in the corner of a cellar or behind a tenement shop. Vendors called out, "Half sour," "Full sour," garlic dill, as kids with nickels crowded around to fish out their favorite from the cold, salty depths. The crunch was sharp, loud enough to cut through the city noise, a bite that carried pride, labor, and longing all at once. Pickle men became legends. They guarded secret spice blends passed down from Poland and Lithuania, mustard seeds, peppercorns, bay leaves, and something else they'd never tell. Each brine was a fingerprint, a taste of heritage you couldn't fake. And while life in New York was harsh, rent collectors knocking, factories roaring, the pickle barrel stayed constant. It was cheap, flavorful, and fiercely alive. For a few cents, it gave you courage to keep going. Decades later, as the old pushcarts vanished, the pickle lived on, in delis, diners, and backyard jars. Its flavor outlasted the streets it was born on. Because resilience has a taste, and if you've ever bitten into a real Lower East Side pickle, you know it: sharp, sour, and unforgettable. Imagine a small tenement apartment on the Lower East Side in 1910. The coal oven glows in the corner, a mother slides a heavy dish of kugel into it before the Sabbath begins. It's a simple casserole of noodles, eggs, cream, maybe a handful of raisins, but to her family it means everything. Kugel wasn't always this smooth, sweet bake. Its roots trace back to medieval Europe, where a dish called pastida, layers of dough and legumes, laid the groundwork. Over time it evolved. Noodle varieties emerged in the 1500s. Potato versions followed later in the 1800s. For Jewish immigrants arriving in New York, kugel was more than food, it was memory, faith, and resilience baked in one dish. In cramped kitchens, far from the shtetl, they stirred wide egg noodles, cottage cheese, sour cream, sugar. A humble casserole became a vessel of nostalgia. On Friday night, when the oven light warmed the hall, families gathered. The top layer of noodles crisped while underneath was soft, creamy, familiar. Each spoonful spoke of the new world, but salted with old world longing. It carried the Sabbath's quiet promise: rest, reflection, renewal. And when kugel cracked its way from immigrant tables into delis and Sunday dinners across the city, it carried that same story. The intertwined noodles, heritage. The sweetness, survival. The heat from the oven, a mother's love. So next time you pull a fork through that golden top, remember, it isn't just a side dish. It is history, identity, and endurance. Picture a small tenement kitchen in 1905 New York. A mother leans over a chip bowl, grinding carp, pike, and whitefish together with onion and matzah meal. Outside, pushcarts rattle down Hester Street. Inside, something sacred simmers: gefilte fish, a dish born from poverty, faith, and resourcefulness. In the old villages of Eastern Europe, Jews faced strict Sabbath rules and tight budgets. Fish was expensive, so families learned to stretch one fish into many servings by mixing it with humble ingredients. The word gefilte literally means stuffed, because originally, the minced mixture was packed back into the fish's skin before baking. But when immigrants arrived in New York, time, space, and equipment were scarce, so they shaped it into patties and poached them instead. To many outsiders, it looked plain, pale, soft, served cold with a dab of red horseradish, but to Jewish families it was an anchor to home. Every bite carried the scent of river markets in Poland, the rhythm of Sabbath prayers, and the hush that filled the table before blessings were spoken. By the 1920s, gefilte fish had found its place in every Jewish deli, a quiet reminder that food could carry identity even through struggle. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. It said, "We made something beautiful out of almost nothing." Today, when you see those oval pieces glistening in jelly, remember, that was survival turned into tradition. From tenement kitchens to holiday tables, gefilte fish endures, proof that hope, like faith, can be reshaped and served cold. Steam curls from a chipped enamel bowl. A spoon dips into golden broth, lifting a cloud-soft dumpling. This is matzah ball soup, the heart of Jewish comfort food. To early 1900s immigrants in New York, it wasn't just a meal, it was medicine for the soul, a taste of Sabbath warmth in the chaos of a new world. The story begins in Eastern Europe. During Passover, when leavened bread was forbidden, families crumbled matzah, the crisp, unleavened bread of survival, into meal. Mixed with eggs, schmaltz, and love, it became light dumplings that floated in broth. When Jewish immigrants crossed the Atlantic, the recipe came too, tucked between memories of hunger and hope. In the crowded tenements of the Lower East Side, this soup healed more than colds. It soothed exhaustion from factory shifts, reminded mothers of home, and filled small kitchens with the scent of onions and dill. A single pot could feed a family and a neighbor. Each family guarded its secret, should the balls be firm or soft, sinkers or floaters. That debate alone could fill a Sabbath evening. But beyond texture, the meaning was universal: resilience. Every simmer was a quiet declaration that faith and family would survive any storm. By the 1920s, New York delis adopted it, serving steaming bowls to homesick patrons who longed for comfort that tasted like childhood. And today, one spoonful still carries the whispers of those early kitchens, fragile, crowded, but filled with love. Matzah ball soup wasn't fancy. It was familiar. It reminded an entire generation that no matter how far from home they'd come, warmth could still rise from a humble pot. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't expensive. But on the tables of Jewish immigrants in old New York, chopped liver was a delicacy that spoke louder than luxury ever could. A spread made from chicken livers, onions, and hard-boiled eggs, it became known as the poor man's pâté. In the early 1900s, kosher butchers on Orchard and Delancey streets often gave away chicken livers for free. Immigrant families couldn't waste a thing. So they fried onions in schmaltz, rendered chicken fat, until golden and sweet, chopped it all together, and turned scraps into something rich, silky, and deeply satisfying. But chopped liver was never just about flavor. It was about resourcefulness, the art of making beauty out of what others discarded. Each batch carried the scent of tenement kitchens, narrow halls, flickering gas lamps, and the sound of laughter echoing up the stairs. At Sabbath dinners, a plate of chopped liver on rye bread or matzah wasn't a side dish, it was pride on display. It said, "We may be poor, but we feast like kings." It became a symbol of dignity, nourishment, and the stubborn joy of those who had little yet gave plenty. By the 1920s, Jewish delis in Manhattan transformed this humble spread into an icon. It sat proudly beside corned beef, pickles, and rye, proof that survival could taste as good as celebration. So the next time you see chopped liver at a deli counter, remember, it's not just an appetizer. It's a story of resilience, creativity, and the immigrant spirit that built New York's soul. Imagine a cold New York afternoon in 1907. Streetcars rumble, newsboys shout, and on every corner, the scent of something warm drifts through the air, knishes, golden and steaming from pushcart ovens. For Jewish immigrants, the knish was more than a snack, it was survival wrapped in dough. Originating in Eastern Europe, it began as a peasant dish, mashed potatoes, onions, or kasha stuffed inside thin pastry, baked until crisp and brown. When immigrants landed on the Lower East Side, they brought that tradition with them, and soon, New York's streets smelled like home. A knish cost only a few pennies, making it the perfect poor man's lunch. Factory workers could grab one on the way to work, no fork, no fuss, just hot, hearty comfort in hand. Some vendors sold them from baskets, others from small bakery windows, steam fogging the glass. One bakery, Yonah Schimmel's Knish Bakery, opened in 1910, and it's still standing today. Inside, trays of potato, spinach, and cabbage knishes were served to a line of homesick immigrants who wanted a bite of the old world. But beyond the food itself, the knish became a symbol of pride. It was simple, affordable, and made with love, proof that tradition could adapt and thrive even in the toughest city on earth. By the 1920s, the knish had gone mainstream, sold in delis, lunch counters, and even baseball stadiums. It became the handheld story of Jewish New York, warm, portable, and unshakably human. So next time you see a golden knish split open, steam curling out, remember, this isn't just dough and potatoes. It's a story baked by hands that built a new world from scratch. This is America's Lost Recipes, where street food carries the soul of a people.